I do challenge my own perception like all the time. Learning to listen changes how you see. I think that's the biggest experience I've had in my life. There's this kind of way in which art can be a way to actually force you to abandon your preconceptions about the world and to chip away at them. And that applies not only like in aesthetic terms, but also in social terms, in political terms. Like, if people are so anchored in their own perception of the world, how are they ever going to understand the view of someone else? I would have said that my material is sound, but it's really not. I have a very musical understanding of the world, and I've always had this kind of sensitivity to sound, and it's part of my language. But I guess the material is more memory. I've been asking myself that a lot. I think, especially when you've been working for so many years in different media, you start to build this kind of constellation of very different works which ultimately tell a much bigger story. And the materiality of the work, sometimes it's vibrations, and sometimes it's songs from childhood, sometimes it's my mother or my grandmother. It's really hard to put my finger on what my material is. And I just don't think about the material at all. I just think about the work and the kind of need for that to exist in whatever form it takes. Same with paintings, like the paintings are physically present in the world, but they also represent this completely ethereal, ephemeral thing, which is music and sound and voice, I grew up in a home really with not much access to culture or music or art. Like, it was in the countryside, very isolated. And when I was about 8 years old, a woman came in off the street with my sister, who brought her in, saying that she was running away from a bailiff. We had like an old, ruined house that we were living in. It had a barn, and she wanted to hide her piano because it was the last thing that she had. And my parents very sort of kindly said, "Yeah, sure, you can hide this piano in the barn." And it turned out to be a Steinway. The next thing we know, there's this truck arriving, and this Steinway Model B is in the barn. And I'm like this kid, 8 years old, and I was totally mesmerized by this machine. And I kept teaching myself. And my parents didn't know what to do with me. And so they took me to the local school, a music school, and said, "Look, this is our kid, and he's doing this." And they took me in on a full scholarship, and it totally changed my life, because suddenly I went from no music to total music. Our culture prioritizes the visual so much, and even our phones, which are like these bright, multicolored, multi-pixeled screens, have such terrible little speakers on them. And you go on Instagram, and not only is everything shortened in terms of your attention, but also it's thinned out in terms of the experience. And the acoustic experience online is just so awful, And that's the opposite of our lived experience. Our ears are incredible. They're so subtle. They have such an incredible ability to understand and hear nuances and create emotions within us. And so I think when you start to try to rebalance that, when you start to really listen deeply to things, to the world, to each other, there's this sense of rediscovery. And that's what's exciting. Why do any of this? Why try to make a work that makes a building sing, or why build an orchestra of vessels from an ancient collection of artifacts? I think it's because we've looked at them so much. We've looked at them to death. We can't see them, and we can't see any more by looking. But when we listen to them, suddenly what we see changes, and what we understand about the object or the place or the person changes. So that's why I do it. There's this constant sense of revelation and excitement. When you see something that you think you know, and bam, it's totally transformed because of suddenly its voice exists in a different way, you know? So when I talk about sound having a sculptural presence, it's that the sound physically has a shape, which if you could just see the air, you'd see these amazing shapes. But also that physical things have a sound. So if you make a vessel, like a ceramic vessel or any kind of vessel, every vessel has its own shape and every shape has its own sound. And that's like a really beautiful truth about the world. Like there's no pot in the history of potters in the world that has ever not had a musical note. And from the moment that that ceramicist finishes the pot, that musical note will be in there forever. And I did an exhibition at the Met many years ago working with the vessels of their collection at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And the curators, when we went into these storerooms and we went into these galleries and we just listened to these objects and we heard that a 7,000-year-old ceramic from what is now Iran sings a D natural, and it's been singing a D natural for thousands of years. You know, it's very humbling and it's very, but it's also very sculptural. You know, like that is a shape that has a sound, and then that sound has its shape as well. You know, every physical form has harmony, and it's not even like that's not a woo-woo thing to say. It's just true. Like it's true of the world. You know. So for me, like working with resonance, like, resonance is what this is all about. You know, resonance is a scientific word, which has a very specific scientific meaning, but it's a word that we use all the time when we talk about art, music, literature, and it's very elusive because it even though it's so precise and I work with resonance in buildings, with vessels, with the voice. You know, I'll have find the resonance of the body itself, like by having singers sing through each other's mouths, or you know, many ways to explore resonance. But what's really interesting is when that physical resonance translates into an emotional experience, which for some reason, I think that's why people use the word resonance so much. It's actually a kind of catch-all word for something which is hard to express. It's this kind of sense of almost like an empathy with the world, or a synchrony. You know, it's a sense of being connected in some way through something invisible. There's one that came after Composition for Mouths that's called Composition for Face and Hands. It's a percussion piece where you have two people, two percussionists facing each other. There's microphones all around them, really, really sensitive microphones, so that the slightest touch on the face becomes incredibly loud. And it's very ASMR, if you know what that is. It's like really intimate. And I'm one of the two percussionists, and basically I wrote a score for the face, and we calibrated each other's faces by like drawing and finding out where each of the sounds could be found. And someone's like a bass drum on the forehead, and there's like the hi-hat on the beard, you know. And this composition starts very intimately, and it's very gentle, and it's very sweet. But as the music gets more complex and louder and more rhythmic, the face as an instrument, you know, becomes really, it sounds incredible, but it also becomes very violent. And so by the end of the piece, these two guys, and there's two girls as well in a separate video, we're basically beating each other up, but musically. And that was a funny one because like it was again a very intuitive work to make. It's this sense of like we feel sound through our bodies, and we feel music through our bodies. And when you go clubbing and you feel that incredible like rhythm, and there was this kind of desire to feel that in the deepest way possible. But when your face becomes the instrument, and when you're being, you know, played and slapped rhythmically in this way, it was almost like quite euphoric, because every time you get slapped, you as a reflex, you blink. It's like stroboscopic. It's really extraordinary. But it's also like a very, how do I say this? you're playing each other in this piece. And so you're kind of giving each other this musical experience and you're collaborating in the moment. I actually got a concussion from making the work. And I sometimes wonder whether I should have made it. So the cave is a really important work for me. I'd say in my life there's a kind of before and after this work, this experience. It's a video opera. If for want of a better word, it's like a video installation with 8 screens, 8 singers. On each screen is a different singer, and you can follow their voices individually as you walk through the space. And I shot it in the Paleolithic caves in France, you know, the famous painted, ancient, beautiful caves, which are, you know, in the first pages of all of our art history books. And I had the chance to go and visit. I think it was about 2020 or so. And I went with the chief curator of Lascaux, Jean-Michel Geneste. Incredible man, great expert on Paleolithic art. And I went into the cave with him and I did what I always do when I'm making a space resonate, which is to sing very quietly under my breath, these sliding notes. And if you sing them really quietly, so you can barely hear them, when you hit the note that resonates in the cave amplifies it, or the space amplifies it. And suddenly that note has its own strength, its own life, and you focus on it. And then at that moment, we lift up the flashlight, and in front of me there's this frieze of bison, you know, like a huge concentration of paintings. And we're standing in exactly the same space that they were standing in 16,000, 17,000 years ago. And I went through the cave progressively, just looking for these different places which would resonate. And I made a map of the cave, showing where each of those places was found within the cave. And we cross-referenced the map, even just empirically. Every time I found this huge note, we would find an amazing center of human activity there, paintings or broken stalactites or something. And when you look at the map of harmonics and resonance and you compare it with the map of paintings, it seems as though there is more painting in the places where there's more resonance. But the idea that in the very earliest art of humanity, there was already maybe a relationship to music. And for me, that connection between music and art is so fundamental, it's so arbitrary to separate them. You know, I went down into that cave 8 times over 3 years with 8 different singers. Everyone from Rufus Wainwright to Woodkid to Melissa Laveau, incredible Haitian-Canadian singer, Hamed Sino from Mashrou Leila, singers who brought with them their music and who I was able to spend time in the cave with. And it's still really hard for me to put words on what that experience was. It was 3 years of really obviously profound emotion of going in there and singing with singers who brought with them their music and their childhood memories, which I had to write. As a composer, I had to write the composition so that all of those different melodies would interact with each other in a polyphony, you know, which was a real head fuck. There is a need to connect in the work that I make. I hadn't thought of it like that, but it's true. Resonance is about connection, whether it's connection of ideas or connection of bodies or sounds or materials. But yeah, this piece in the cave is, yes, it's this kind of desperate desire to, not even a desire because it's a fact. We're connecting with this art and this music that existed in a time before any of our cultures or nations or political differences or languages existed. You know, this is a shared space that we really, really inherit together as human beings. And when I took singers into the space, they are connecting to the place, they're connecting to the art there, they're connecting to the earth because it's a natural space. It's you know, one of the singers said it's like being in the womb because it's this kind of amazing, you know, comforting place to be. I only started making paintings from sound about 5 years ago, where, you know, it's funny, my whole life I could see the sound of a space or the sound of an object. I could just see, like with the cave, I could see that it was going to sing, you know. But it's quite abstract for people to hear that, and like I said before, everyone's totally prioritizing their visual experience of the world. And it was during the lockdown that I was, you know, by myself, squatting in Soho in this big warehouse studio, when I started to play with an idea that I first had actually when I was still a student at the Ruskin in 2008. I think I made a resonance piece with flour on the surface of a drum and a speaker underneath, and making beautiful patterns in the flour as it vibrated. And I took that idea and I ran with it, and I'd always wanted to do paintings of sound with sound. And I put my canvas horizontally in my studio, and I put the finest possible pigment you could imagine, so fine that the tiniest vibration will move it. And I put a speaker under the canvas, and I started to play pure sine waves, pure sounds. And the speaker vibrates the air, and the air vibrates the pigment, and the pigment takes on the shape of the sound. And what I realized when I started painting in this way was that the beauty of music could be encapsulated in a painting, and there could be in some way a real parallel, not like a arbitrary link, like even though, you know, even though Kandinsky and Klimt were making paintings about music, they were still paintings about music. They were not paintings of with music. That's why I thought it was interesting and exciting. And when I saw how far it could go, and how not only how magical the experience is, like, because painting like this is like totally magical. It feels, it's honestly a bit like sitting at the piano, because I've learned over these years, I've learned the notes that have these different shapes and which frequencies, which volumes, so I know exactly how I'll be able to move the pigment. And it's just like when you learn your scales and your harmony and everything, but when you sit at the piano and you can play and you just get totally lost, and you can improvise, you can play things that you know. It's just like that when I paint now. Like, it's this totally fluid, flowing, again, like a kind of non-verbal experience. I get totally lost. It's like when you're driving somewhere and you arrive without realizing that you've got there. You know, like there's this flow state that you enter into. In terms of painting, it's like I accepted that actually I accepted that beauty could be a way into the painting and a way into the experience. So when I made paintings for the cave, I made them using the same pigment as they used in the cave. I made them, as I always do, using very pure sine waves and pure sounds, and some of those sine waves were recorded in the cave. So some of the cave sound made its way into the paintings as well. And it kind of opened the floodgates for me, like, as you know, I guess an artist who's always worked in many, many disciplines. It was the deepest and furthest I've ever been able to go into painting, and I can't stop, partly because it feels like I say, it feels like making music, and it feels so the same as all of the performance and sound and film works that I've made, you know? It is literally the same thing as standing in the corner of a museum and making it resonate, putting your sound into the corner of a painting and seeing that resonance, and seeing how, you know, you can see it in the paintings behind me. There's this kind of infinite possibility of combination of color and sound. You know, it's hard because I'm actually a very private kind of person in some ways, and yet, as an artist, you know, you and as a musician, it's all about communicating, connecting, and for me, that tension actually has given rise to more collaboration. Like, so, The Cave is about the childhood of every one of those singers. I didn't put myself in the film, but it's also about my childhood and my loss. And you know, I grew up with my grandmother. She was like my second mum. She was my best friend. And when she died and I was 17, I was just totally blown out of the water. You know, I loved her so much, and she was so funny, and so, you know, she's just an incredible person. And the earliest piece of music the earliest piece of art that I made is actually her kitchen floor. It's something that she made. So when she died, I rolled up her linoleum kitchen floor because she put it down in our kitchen in like the 1960s. And after 40 years of walking around from the fridge to the sink to the oven, her path had been worn through the surface of the lino, so you could see her life on the ground. And I was 17, and I just didn't want anyone else to walk on that, because it was a portrait of her life, and all a life with all those complications. A woman in her kitchen, born in 1913, who was not allowed to be a musician by her father, who was a musician. I saw this floor and I rolled it up and I put it in the barn. I wasn't an artist, I was a kid. But when I had my first exhibition at Modern Art Oxford, I unrolled this piece in 2008 and I hung it on the wall like a painting. And it's still, for me, the kind of key to why I do all of this, because that empty space that she inhabited, it's a cave in a way, it's an empty volume. Now I can look at that floor and I can tell you exactly what note the kitchen would sing based on its shape, you know. You asked me about the tension between basically public and private in some ways. And for me, like, why is my life so interesting that the work should be about me in particular? I mean, we all have grief and we all have childhood and we all have, you know, love, and we all tease each other, and there is no reason for me that my personal experience has to be at the center of the work. But my experience of making the work and learning to make music with great musicians and learning to make a building sing in a way that it's never sung before, or discovering a connection between art and music in this cave. It's all like deeply personal, but there's something about the process of making art which allows you to turn the personal into something that is shared. And that's interesting to me. And I'm always like, how do I say this? Like, I'm quite shy, really. and yet when you're a musician and you're an artist, you can't be that shy, because you have to share and you have to communicate, you know? So as I get older, I'm also learning to share.